Hi, guys, and welcome to a very unique and one of a kind episode of Valley Views. I am your host, Amanda Joy Christensen, and I'm the writer of Valley Views, a storytelling podcast that you can find on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple, and iHeart, along with many of other places you can find a podcast. The main goal of Valley Views is to profile stories, humans, different viewpoints, and bring to life a special idea around topics on family, hospitality, travel, and in my case, Las Vegas, where I'm based from. With that being said, I also always want to assure that my platform is a place where anyone can come and feel comfortable about bringing a new viewpoint to someone listening on the other side. I hope that through these stories, I can save a life, share a story, and create a community of truly authentic people working to make the world a safer and better place. So, without further ado, I have my very first interview guest, Randall Norman DeSoto, who is an award-winning screenwriter, journalist, and a U.S. Army veteran. And I am so excited to welcome you. So thank you so much. And if you want to share a little bit about who you are to my audience.
Thank you, Amanda. I actually live in Phoenix, although I'm not there right now. I usually do make stops in Vegas when I'm coming and going for different places. I like to stop and see a show, get dinner, and then head on my way. So, I mean, I'll spend the night there and then are in Henderson next door. I've probably been to Vegas like a half dozen times in recent years, maybe more. But so it's not so far from Phoenix, and it's a nice stop when I'm coming back, say from Mammoth Lakes or something like that. I just head right across the desert, stay in Vegas, and it's exciting. So,
I love
um,
that.
and I used to work in hospitality. Actually, I used to be a front desk at the Sheraton in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So I got to see all the. I did. How did only? I'm 6 or 7 years. I think I did that. I was working on screenplays on the side, and then working at the front desk at the Sheraton. So that even I even wrote a screenplay based on that. That's nothing came of it, but it was fun to get my
That is
thoughts down.
incredible. I
But
actually worked for the Westin, so we were Starwood. I mean, I'm sure it's
yeah,
different time frames, but Starwood generation people. And one of a lot of the basis of my experience comes from working front desk at a hotel and just learning what that's like. You learn so much about people skills, dynamics of different cultures, and like travel expectations, and get to meet cool people along the way.
yeah, I became an expert at signing people up for Starwood. I
Yeah.
mean, and so I would use those points then that you got your incentive points, and I'd fly over to Hawaii and I'd stay at the Sheraton, Waikiki for like 65 a night or
Yes.
something on the employee rate. And this was back in the 2000s, late 90s, 2000s. And
That's awesome.
so I did
That's
that a
so
couple times. I go
cool.
to writers conferences on Maui, but then I'd stay in at Waikiki coming and going. And I liked history, so there's Pearl Harbor there and other stuff. So,
Yes. So,
but
into the next question. So, where are you from and where did you grow up? And I since you touched a little bit about one of the questions I have is like, what's a core memory of where you grew up and what is something that kind of like shaped that experience of who you are now?
I grew up in Central PA, where I am right now, Pennsylvania,
Oh,
and
cool. I'm from Pennsylvania as well. Very nice.
so yeah, I moved west. Go west, young man. Any young man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did that in 2003 is when I went west, and then I've been back and forth up to Alaska and a couple of things. But I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I became a big history buff here. Of course, history is all around. And,
Yes.
I was just over at Independence Hall yesterday, um, and in Philadelphia, and which is like 2-ish hours from here in Harrisburg, where I am. And
Yeah,
then
which is the capital of
yeah,
Pennsylvania. I was born in Philadelphia, and I find it very interesting because many of my class trips were like going to the Liberty Bell, going to Independence Hall, going to see all the historical sites, and then you move out to the West Coast, and there isn't that depth to like culture and found the founding foundations of our country, which is part of also why we're connecting because it's 250 years of American history and like the core of your background has really been in screenwriting, journalism, and authoring about history. So that was like also something really interesting to me coming from the East Coast, now living on the West Coast through my show, I interview people who are kind of encapsulizing history in their books or encapsulizing history in their work. Because right now it might not seem so big, but 5 to 10 years from now, it's very impactful. So tell me more about like your industry background and then your obviously book that you want to share on and what that journey looked like.
So yeah, I was. It's ironic actually. I was over at a meeting in the capital area today in Harrisburg, just talking about my book, and I was saying to them that I started this book back in '96. I had just worked a political campaign, and our candidate won to be attorney general, and so I was thinking that was not necessarily what I wanted to do, though, was go work in one of the jobs that might be in the attorney general's office. It seemed
Yeah.
not. I have more of a creative push, and government jobs are very
They're
that's
like
the
corporate
growth.
jobs. They're
Yeah,
very I've struggled. I know what you mean. Like when you have a creative side fitting into the box, it's hard sometimes.
yeah, it's like a ducks in a row.
Yeah.
So that fitting the history, and I was thinking about all these things, and I had an idea for a book, or I should say, a friend at a congressional office I was working in as a volunteer around this time frame too. After the campaign, he said, maybe you should write a book about the things you care about. And I thought maybe I will. And so I
Yeah.
was down in Gettysburg just hiking around Little Round Top, which is one of the sites of the key battle. It was a 3-day battle down there.
Mhm.
So it was one of the sites of the key encounters. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, they did a bayonet charge, saved the Union line from being flanked and all this stuff. So it was pretty dramatic. So I was thinking, gee, these guys put it all on the line. And here I am. I've got some savings and this desire to write this book about the Declaration of Independence. And so I guess I'm going to do it. And so I just set out and I moved back to Virginia Beach where I'd gone to law school, got an apartment down there. And I just started camping out in the library. And of course, the internet wasn't as big a deal back then.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was a lot of library times, and you had online search capabilities within the library itself, um, but it was a
Most
lot of just physically pulling books off the shelf.
pulling books,
Mhm.
yeah. And then like sitting there with your pen and paper and kind of taking notes and writing down the information you wanted to capture or
And
trying to
photocopying.
photocopy
I did a lot of photocopying.
everything. Yeah. It's interesting too with history because one of my majors in college and then in high school was like US politics actually and US American history that focused on the Constitution. And when I tell people that, they laugh because I ended up in hospitality. But many of the experiences I had growing up on the East Coast, I did volunteers with like the different political parties. A lot of my mom's friends and affiliates were government or local officials, and even now through some of the work I've done on Valley Views, I've allowed to I've used journalism to kind of bridge that gap because so many people don't want to talk about history, but if we don't know our history, we will repeat it. And also, we also don't know what our rights are as people. Like studying the Constitution and knowing what your rights are and the ability to have freedoms is just so much more powerful. And it's lost because we live in a world now where you're kind of social mediaed into what is cool or like how you should look because of trends. And back in the day, organic research was truly that, like going somewhere, either the site that it happened at and doing your own foot research or spending hours in a book reading about it. And my mom always took me, like she grew up in the journalism side and media side, and always took me to like Virginia and Washington, D.C., Baltimore. I was just this little kid always on like a history adventure, but it made it so cool because now as an adult, I'm like, yeah, I've been there. I've seen that. I can feel proud to know like the foundation of my country. And I think that gets missed too. And taking the courage and the idea to write your own book to educate people, that's so much more valuable than I think people give it credit for anymore. Like in all honesty.
No, yeah, I loved it, and that was definitely when I was. Here's what it looks like, but
Yeah.
it's
So
called
it's called
"Behold the
Behold These Truths,
Truths." Yeah.
Two Beliefs Change the World. And you did give me, do you want me to read the summary on it, or you want to give me a summary on what is the focus? And then you've had a lot of really amazing firsthand experiences. really researching the people that you've wrote about too.
Yeah, no, like you, I wrote the book. I started it here in Pennsylvania, and so I had the state library here, and of course I went to the Independence Hall and Gettysburg and Valley Forge and
Love it.
all these places, and then in Virginia it was Yorktown and
Yes.
um, Appomattox and all these different places where where that's where the Civil War ended. I went to Charleston where the Civil War began, in South Carolina, and took the ferry out to the Sumter Island and walked around that. So I say in the description of the book, online that I walk the grounds, so, and I say from Boston to Gettysburg to Bastogne, which
Yes.
is that kind of bridges the three eras I focus on, and in addition to looking at today. But I look at the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and World
And then
War
World War
II
II. Yeah.
to show how the Declaration of Independence has influenced our history, not only there at the founding, but leaders kept appealing to those ideals throughout. Of course, even into the present time, really. But
How
yeah.
do you feel through your own research? This isn't really one of my questions, but doing this research yourself, how has putting this tool out there to educate other people changed people's opinions of being proud to live in our country or feel like they want to stand up and become a business owner, an entrepreneur, or a civic leader in the community to have a voice? Because I think so much of the political world sits on like, if you have an opinion, it's wrong either side, but it's like, your voice can truly ripple in a way where it can change time and place.
Well, yeah, that's the premise of my book. I had an original edition come out in '07, and that was an entree to me being hired on a documentary film, that we made a movie we called I Want Your Money. And so we
Yes.
compared Reagan and Obama and their presidencies and big government versus more limited government and the ups and downs of that. So that was more political, but it was fun. We had three original cartoons in it with all the recent presidents back to Nixon. And then we had Arnold Schwarzenegger and Hillary and Nancy Pelosi and Sarah Palin, who was big at that time. That
Big
was
at
oh
that
09,
time.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh
Yes.
09, 10. And
Yes.
so it was just, so it was a serious, but at times lighthearted take on government and dialoguing on these issues. And so Reagan was always the wise one trying to help Obama see how economies work. And
Yeah.
so, but the book really, that was the entry to that because the director I was referred to the director because of the book I'd written. And
That's
so,
awesome.
and then it got accepted into the Library of Congress and everything, but it didn't get a huge readership. I was able to do some interviews and do some talks, and I had really nice feedback from it. But I'm hoping that this edition with the 2026 anniversary 250th will have a wider, and now there's an Audible version that's out now, an audiobook,
Incredible.
audiobook. It's on different platforms and soon will be on Audible. I assume it's going to be on, they're reviewing it.
Now, is your book available to purchase now, or do you have a launch date? Tell a little bit about how it can be found, and then obviously we can tag a link in the notes, but tell people how they can find your book.
So yeah, there are other books named We Hold These Truths. Of course, I'm
Okay.
Randall DeSoto, my formal name.
Okay.
But the two beliefs change. And I always say you look for those nine pictures. There are nine pictures of different people on it if you're
Yes.
listening to it. But it's
Yeah.
got, Jefferson all the way to Reagan and Julia Ward Howe's there, Frederick Douglass. And so it's Randall DeSoto. But if you go to my social media sites, like at
Okay.
Randy DeSoto on X or
Okay.
Instagram at Randy DeSoto, the links to the Amazon purchase, you can buy it in any place, any of
Any
the
place.
big, yeah. But
Awesome. Awesome.
Amazon is, probably where most people will buy it. But Barnes
Yeah.
and Noble, maybe, I've gotten some on Barnes and Noble myself just to make sure it works.
That's awesome. So I would say that may I read off of the information I received, just the brief description as well, so people can get kind of like a summary of what we hold these truths have in store for them.
Sure, yeah.
If that's fine. So it says we hold these truths, the two beliefs that still hold the power to transform the nation and the world. It is time to focus on what the United States has gotten right in the pursuit of liberty in the last 250 years since the nation's founding. Two beliefs undergird America's experiment in liberty, and they are articulated in the Declaration of Independence. The book, We Hold These Truths, is a gripping narrative about the impact of the ideals, and it will be taking readers through the three most epic and defining moments in U.S. history, like you said, the Revolutionary War, Civil War, and World War II, and on to today. Some of the people featured in the account include Patrick Henry, George Washington. So if these are your faces you'll find on, for those listening not to the video, these are the faces to look for when you find the book.
Yeah, yeah.
Patrick Henry, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Julia Ward Howe, Franklin Roosevelt, Patton, Douglas MacArthur, Ronald Reagan, and Charlie Kirk. We Hold These Truths makes clear why the United States became the land of the free and the home of the brave. So incredible people to profile. Um, it's very interesting because I always tread lightly on politics, but I noticed in your notes, like you did have an opportunity to interview Charlie. So, like, why did you include him as an influential person in the book alongside some of these other epic political leaders? I mean, I have my own understanding of who he was, but I would love to know from your insight a little bit about what that was like.
Well, I met him a couple and interviewed him a couple times over the years. I met him when his movement was kind of young, the Turning Point, uh, and I interviewed him most recently in 2020. And then I had some back and forth in text messages since then. But
Yeah,
but I was impressed when he was just like 19 or 20. He's there at CPAC with all these college age kids behind him, and they got all these signs and stuff. Big government sucks, and so there he was. I thought, boy, this is a cultural leader. And I should say in my book, that's even a better place to explain it.
yes,
Each of the three sections of the book, there's a chapter dedicated to a cultural leader. So
love
somebody not
that.
in politics, but who's influencing the culture. So Thomas Paine, of course, was that in the Revolution. His Common Sense sold like 100,000 copies in the first 3 months, and then 500,000 by the end of the war. And the whole population of the country, the U.S. anyway, was only 4 million ish. So obviously, it was a pamphlet, so people were maybe buying multiple copies, and
Yeah,
and you read it now, and it's never been out of print. You read it now, and he just deals with some of the broad, important principles, and he's quoting the Bible left and right, and other, using reason too, not just biblical. I mean, the Bible has reason in it also,
yeah,
but
I would
he's not.
agree more so than anything else at times.
but the but he's also just laying out the facts and making arguments, separate from the idea of God-given rights or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so then in the Civil War, it was Frederick Douglass. Again, he
Yes.
wasn't in government when he was
He was a
advocating for
general, I
abolition.
think. He was a
Well, no,
general
Frederick, he was
or
just he
just
was
a
just a
patron.
speaker. He was a former slave, and
Okay.
so and there's Stephen Douglas too, who was a senator, but Frederick Douglass was a speaker, and he former slave. He escaped from Maryland, and he became a huge advocate for abolishing slavery, and of course spoke with such authority because he'd lived it. And um, and then in the World War II, it was Frank Capra, the famous Hollywood director. It's a Wonderful Life, Mr.
Yeah.
Smith Goes to Washington. But he also wrote an Academy Award-winning documentary film during World War II called Why We Fight,
Hmm.
and Prelude to War. He actually wrote a series of them, but the very first one won an Academy Award. It came out in 42. And he just laid out the argument that the issues were just very much like the issues I talk about in the book. The rights, of man and woman versus just the totalitarian governments they were up against. God-given rights versus dictatorships, and he laid it out so well, and appealed to the founders and quotes and all that stuff. And then, so Charlie Kirk is I wrote an article for the Western Journal not long ago called saying Charlie Kirk was the Thomas Paine of our time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's how he gets in there.
I like that, and it's funny to think that you saw him that way because so many times when people are stepping out and speaking just their authentic truth, even on my own platform, people have given me pushback and said, well, Amanda, why do you talk about every topic? Why don't you leave anything off the table? But someone out there needs to hear the perspective. And at least he was someone raw and real enough, whether you agreed with him or not, to just still be willing to debate the times, still be willing to like stand up for change, still be willing to challenge the narrative. And that kind of leads me into like my next question, like what is a viewpoint in your own life of a challenging obstacle or experience you have that may have held you back from chasing your dream of being a writer or a screen writer? Like how did you overcome some of the harder battles in your own life and then end up on the other side still succeeding so people can understand what that looks like?
Um, I don't know. I remember, I heard some quote sometime, of course, when I was living in LA, I was going to all these seminars and stuff. And that's encouraging in itself as you get around other people who are kind of putting it out there. And,
Yeah.
I joke sometimes that I went for broke and I succeeded, but
You know, sometimes that's how it happens because that's like it's not always about the money. That's like also what I've learned because sometimes people don't see your vision until after the fact. And I think that that's also what's unique about history is like the things that you're touching on are still applying to today, but it's so much stuff after the fact that like you're still just giving people like a tool or a platform. But I'll let you continue on like what you did to kind of still stay motivated through that time of being broke because that didn't stop you from chasing your opportunity to at least like follow through on your dream to write a book and share and educate with other people.
I think in my case, it was certainly faith. I just felt like God wanted me to do it,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and so I couldn't escape. So and the Bible talks about we have flesh and we have spirit. So yeah, my flesh would get uncomfortable thinking about, oh, what are my family going to think about this? Or here I've got a law degree and I'm just kind of taking a hotel job at minimum wage it started with, and then I got a couple raises as I moved up to supervisor and stuff. But I was so committed to getting this book done. I didn't want to take a law job, which I knew would divert me from uh, that. And so
Yeah.
eventually I got into, when I moved to LA, I went in through a temp agency and I started working at Disney as in a temp capacity.
Oh,
And so I was in their legal department. One of the interesting things, I was at their studio a lot of the time. So because I was a temp, I got moved all over Disney and then Universal too a little bit. So I got to see what all these different departments do. And sometimes I'd be at the job for a year, or other
yeah.
times it would be 6 months or 3 weeks, or and so I was
What
in
are
like corporate communications, and I was in corporate litigation, and I was in animation, and I was in,
Oh
and
my gosh, that's
so it
so
was,
cool. That's such a unique aspect of like hospitality background for you to have too. Because a lot of people say to me, Amanda, you're so educated. Why weren't you ever a lawyer? Because I love debating people, and that's just like my nature to find out what's right. But I think you're right. Like you would have got bogged down by the process, and you wouldn't have actually been able to what I've loved about my career in Vegas is many of the places I worked, I was like that, where like I started in one department in revenue, but then ended up in sales, but then ended up in events, then ended up in catering, then ended up throwing private events for the governor. So it's like when I
yeah.
think about like, or standing in the room with Hollywood stars, like things that have happened that I'm just like, it's had I never said yes and never have had the drive to learn, I wouldn't be so eager to teach and educate and inspire like the next generation of leaders under me too, because in your case, you didn't take the path you went to school for, but you still found success and like interesting things along the way. It also said that when your 2010 political documentary, I Want Your Money, came out, it was distributed over in 500 theaters nationwide. You also were a finalist for the Movie Guide's Faith and Freedom Award. And it was screened at CPAC and Value Voter Summit ahead of the 2010 midterms, which you briefly mentioned. You've been an assistant producer on films and interviewed some really amazing people. Like when you're walking into interviews, do you know what you're going to say ahead of time, or do you just sort of let the conversation go? Especially since this is my first interview I'm doing with someone.
Well, no, like, so in the case of the documentary film, when we were interviewing people like um, Mike
Mike
Huckabee or
Huckabee.
Newt
Yeah.
Gingrich or Andrew Breitbart, Pete Wilson, the former governor of California,
Yeah.
and people like that, Michael Reagan. So we were, and then experts at these different think tanks and stuff whose names people might not know, but um, the no, we of course we wanted, we had the big story what we wanted to tell in the film, and so and we had to, I had to size up based on their writings and what they've said in public and whatever. What is their contribution to this story? So we would ask questions that would hopefully solicit those sort of responses. And I was there, so the director of the film would usually ask the question directly. Now, in my job at the Western Journal, of course, I was the one asking the question, but I would be sitting next to him and he'd say, should we do this? So I would say, well, let's, I would so based on what they were responding, I'd say, oh, ask about this or that. So
Yeah.
I was kind of a co-interview, you might think, but he was the on-camera presence or the voice you might hear. Or of course, a lot of
On the
times
doctorate. Yeah.
we didn't even use his voice in many cases because we are just
Focusing
wanting
on the
the sound
content.
bite
Yeah.
of what that person was saying.
Well, I really thank you, Randy. Our time is actually getting close to an end, so I want to ask you one final question. What is the one thing that you wish you could tell your younger self now as an adult?
Um, I was in a class recently through church. It was a college type class that they were offering. Former college president was teaching it. He has his PhD in counseling and psychology, maybe, or something.
Yeah.
Psychiatry. I don't know, one of those. And so he had us do the personality types. And I realized that I was a high C, which is conscientious, in the disc test where
Okay.
they D
Yeah.
is dominant, I
Yeah.
influence. So I was a high C, very conscientious. And so we went over all the ups and downs of those personality types. And I realized I had taken some of the strengths of the C and they'd become too much. Like I was too critical of myself and uh, I hate to say it, but too judgmental of others sometimes, because when you can give yourself some slack, you can give others some
Other
slack too.
Slack. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's a lesson I've had to learn over time. So that's
I
one of the
love
bigger ones.
that. I love that. Well, I personally was so honored to just take a little bit of my time out of my day to get to know you better. Um, I am going to just thank all of the listeners for the show. I am not sure if this video will cut or not. I don't edit it, so if it's going to cut right at 2:30, but I truly appreciate your time. And most of all, just like continuing to use your voice and your education and your knowledge to educate other people. I will send out and include ways for everyone to buy your book. And then we will stay connected via email. And if we want to connect again on the show, let me know. I loved just hearing your story and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Amanda. No, I enjoyed this too. It's fun having
Yeah.
a common
Yeah.
background in
You,
hospitality and Pennsylvania.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.